Just waiting for Jay to get into his office. Jay, let me know if you're there.
That's okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right.
Good.
Good. All right. So let's get started. Do you have any topics you would like to go over?
No specific topic.
All right, that's great. Then I will tell you all about what I've been up to for the past 3 weeks or so. First week of those 3 weeks, I was preparing for Orchard Harvest, which is it's a conference about the Orchard project, which is an open source application framework. And as some may know, Elsa Workflows originated out of the Orchard Core Workflows module. So it was a great opportunity for me to show the community of Orchard the current state of Elsa. So I demoed Elsa 3, which was a lot of fun. A lot of time went into preparing this talk at the conference, for the conference, including preparing a little Orchard module to integrate Elsa with Orchard itself, which was also a lot of fun, but it also exposed some of the limitations at the time to, reuse the designer, for example, in another application. So as a result, that's now a much better story, and I'm going to continue building this Orchard module as a showcase, but also as an actual useful module for the Orchard community to basically bring back Elsa workflows into Orchard. So originally I took out the Orchard workflows, but I didn't take it out, but I copied it into a separate project, which became Elsa 1. And now it seems very fitting to move this improved workflows product back into Orchard. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm gonna continue on that later. Currently, my current focus is Elsa Studio, the Blazor implementation. That's what I've been working this week. I picked it up again. I don't know if I've shown you anything about that, but I'm gonna show some updates today.
Just the start, but not in 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay. Yeah. Well, not too much has changed since that time. Since I was only able to resume work on that early this week. So, but there's still some good updates there. So I'm going to show that. In the meantime, I've also worked on documentation, and in order to explain a little bit about the extensibility of creating custom persistence providers, I created a new persistence provider using Dapper. So now we have EF Core that we can use, but we can also use Dapper. And theoretically, that should be faster than EF Core. So I've been told, but I haven't done any measurement, so I don't know for sure. But it's another option in case people want to use it, and it serves as an example to show what you can do with custom providers. And it's also now possible to access activity output directly. So as some of you may know, in Elsa 3, when you want to capture output of a given activity, you need to associate it with a workflow variable, and then you can use that variable in other activities. And the reason for these variables is to allow you to control whether or not you want to persist the output of an activity. But there's also many scenarios where you don't want to persist these values. You just want to use it in subsequent activities within the same burst of execution. So then it would be more convenient if you can directly access the output of a previously executed activity, and also to have some last result value, so that you can always access the result of the last executed activity without having to know the name or the ID of the previous activity that executed. So there's a new variable called last result, which will always contain the value of the last executed activity. And you now have an API to access the output of a named activity or any activity that has an ID, which should be all activities. So so that should make it a little bit more easy. I'm going to show how that works. Actually, let's dig into that right away. And of course, if you have any questions at any time, just interrupt. So while this loads, let me also show you how you can access the activity output directly from a programmatic workflow, and then we'll look at the designer example. So here we have this one. So this is a console application. It's a very simple program. It shows two workflows. They have the same function, but they use two different methods of accessing activity output. The first one demonstrates accessing the output of a activity directly. So when you're using a programmatic workflow, what you can do is here, for example, I instantiate a readline activity and assign it a C# variable. And then, so this is an activity, and then here I put it in the activities array of the sequence activities. So it's going to execute after these activities. And the reason I put this activity in a variable is so that I can access its result from, well, in this case, the next activity, but it doesn't have to be the next activity. I could have accessed it from any subsequent activity using a very intuitive syntax, because this is just accessing the variable and then you request its result. With a readline has an output which looks like this. Actually, let me show you. So this is the readline implementation. It inherits from code activity, result type of string. So every activity that inherits from an activity with a generic type argument, such as code activity of type string, these activities have a result property that they inherit. I'll show you that as well here. So here's the result property. So this property is inherited by readline, which I'm using here using an extension. I think it's an extension. Yeah, called getResult, which internally gets the result properties value. And I'm taking advantage of automatic conversion, value conversion. So here I need, for this example, I need it in the form of an integer. So very conveniently, I can convert it here. So whatever the user put in the console, I convert that input into an int and do the logic here. So that's one way. And then the other way is, so this is the same workflow or same workflow in terms of functionality, but here I'm taking advantage of the get last result extension method to get the output of the last executed activity, which in this case is readline. So because the readline executed before this activity, I can take advantage of that. Of course, if you want to access the last result from another activity that executed after, if, for example, in that case, you would have to use the variable approach that I've shown here, right? So in any case, if you have like a chain of activities where one activity outputs something and you want to use it as an input into the next one, and so forth, then the last result might be very convenient for you. Maybe you're processing files or whatever. And this is an important point. This value exists only in memory, so it's not being persisted anywhere. If you did want to persist it, you need to capture it using a variable and then configure the persistence of that variable, which could be workflow storage, which means it's become serialized as part of the workflow instance document. Could be blob storage or a custom persistence provider. All right, so this is the programmatic way. And then if I refresh this.
And when we capture with a variable activity, we cannot directly configure in the activity itself that we want to store the output in a variable. We need to use the variable activities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, indeed.
Okay.
So the output value will be gone, but if the variable is persistent, then you will access the variable. Yeah. And Elsa 2, it works differently, where you can configure the outputs store persistence setting directly. In Elsa 3, I wanted to experiment with a different mechanic, and it's entirely possible, depending on feedback from users, to reintroduce that possibility where you can control the persistence of output. And in that case, variables are optional. You can still use them because it can still be convenient, but then at that point it becomes optional as well. All right, so creating a new workflow. Let's say we have an HTTP endpoint that can trigger this workflow, listening at this path, and we're gonna post some JSON content to it. So before this change, you had to assign a declare variable and then assign it to the parsed content output if you wanted to use the parsed JSON, or assign a variable to route data, query string data, etc., whatever you wanted to access, right? But now we can access this thing directly using JavaScript. So for example, that would look like this. I could say get output from, and then I specify the activity ID, which would be HTTP endpoint 1. That's this thing here. Optionally, you need to provide an output name. In the case of an activity that produces multiple outputs, like the HTTP endpoint, then this is necessary. If you don't specify it, it will default to the named output called result. But in this case, we wanted to use parsed content, I think is the name. Parsed content, yes. And this is just a display name. So maybe we should also somehow display the technical name, because you need the technical name as the argument here. So this won't work. You need to do it like this. So that's one way. Another way is a more, well, it's not really strongly typed, but it has IntelliSense support at least. So you could say get parsed content from HTTP endpoint 1. So this is a generated JavaScript function based on the information it has of the system. So it has information about the ID or the output of the activities in the workflow and their outcome and their identifiers. And then it constructs a name using a convention. So the nice thing about this is that it's easier to discover, so you don't have to click back and forth and maybe make a mistake in terms of the name of the activity or the idea of the activity and the name of the output. And also it has the potential for IntelliSense to display the actual type of the output. In this case, I didn't implement it, so it's going to default to any. And actually, in the case of HTTP endpoint parsed content, this being an object would result in any. But if I chose route data, then we have the option now to actually display object dictionary. And of course, for custom activities with specific types, that would work as well. But to be clear, that's not currently implemented, but I will implement that at some point. So yeah, so this way I can access it directly, no variables necessary. So let's see if this works. Publish this workflow, and then I'm gonna use Postman. And as you can see, of course, this is not about MongoDB, but it took in this input and it echoed it back directly to the output. So yeah, so that's another option to handle output.
So in that case, there is no persistence.
No persistence.
Okay,
no option
so if there is any crash between HTTP endpoint and HTTP response because of another activity, or okay, in that case the workflow is persisted with the delay, and so the value is lost.
That's right, exactly. Okay. That's the point here. This will cause the workflow instance to be persisted, removed from memory, depending on the workflow runtime. And then after the delay occurs, the workflow instance will be resumed, but you will no longer have access to this HTTP endpoint's output. And reasoning of that is because these objects that are being output could be very large objects. They could be large files. They could be objects that are not serializable, like data sets, for example, from ADO.NET. So it becomes very tricky to deal with those kind of objects. And one solution could have been, of course, to just demand any and all activities that produce output, that those outputs need always to be serializable. But then you're limiting the system severely, because there are many scenarios where you do want to process complicated large objects that are not serializable, or are serializable but are too big to be made part of the workflow instance, or maybe it wouldn't be very performant if they were persisted at regular places, and maybe you just want precise control over that. And so for that reason, it's there transiently. If you did want to persist it, then you need to either use a set variable and then configure the variable using storage providers, which could be memory. If you don't really care, you just want to reuse the variable but not persist it, then use memory. By default, it will use the workflow storage provider, which means it will be serialized as part of your workflow instance.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's so you have a lot of control, and as I mentioned earlier, we might even consider adding another column here, and then allowing you to provide the persistence setting at that level. But again, it depends on feedback as well.
Yeah, as I understand, if we add the variable on the right, we can use the variable name on the configuration parsed content, and then directly use the variable in other activity. We don't have to create an activity set variable like in Elsa 2.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, for example,
okay. So for me, it's fine. Yes.
Like this, for example. So payload of type object, storage workflow, and then yes, we say payload.
Yes.
So
if we have
now it will be fine.
A column with our configuration in the activity to set the storage, it's just some sort of shortcut.
Exactly. Yeah.
But for me, on my user side, it's easier in this case in Elsa 3 because we can directly use a variable in the output configuration. And in Elsa 2, we have to create a new shape, a new activity set variable to set the result of an activity into a variable. So it's good.
Yeah, exactly. So at least you don't have to do that in Elsa 3. Indeed,
yeah.
You can just assign the variable directly to this thing here, and as you say, then you can use it here as is. And let's say there's a delay of 3 seconds. And now this time, because of this delay, we will lose the HTTP context. So therefore, I'm using a write line to try it out. So if I send this, so we have an immediate response, but no HTTP response. But we should see the message here in the console. Yeah, so that's it about output and last result.
And last result, maybe I'm missing something. For you, the last result is materialized by what method? The generated method? Or not?
No,
we don't have to see the last result.
Yeah, so get last result is just just the function. You just use this, and this only works if delay, for example, had an output, which it doesn't. But maybe.
And because for this, I have a question. What about if we use the fork?
Let's see. Let's use a fork. Let's use a. Well, let's do it like. So here we have a fork.
Yeah.
And then.
If we use get last result in the to write line on the right.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. So let's do it like this then. So let's say, well, read line is not, well, let's do it for now. Let's say we have this. Of course, the read line will actually block the process because it's going to wait for user to input something in the console, but just for talking about it. So here, it's a good question. At this point, you don't necessarily know what the which output you're going to get. So this would not be a good use case for get last result. Get last result will be more suitable if you have a linear sequence of activities that process some data.
Yes, and on the other hand, if we have one read line at the beginning, and then we fork to two write line, and we use get last result.
Oh, like this. So let's get rid of this, like this.
Yeah. So in the first write line, we will get the last result of read line. And when the second write line will execute, it will get the get result of the write line.
Oh, good question. Yeah, if write line had an output, then yes, but write line doesn't produce an output, so it will reuse again the output of this one because it's the last emitted output. If after write line we would have let's say another read line, and let's assume for a second that this executes first, and this one, and then this one, and then this one. In that case, this write line will use the output of read line if that's the last one that executed. Okay. But if we do it like this, then this one is the last activity that produced an output. So both write lines would be using the same results. Okay, so we have to keep in mind that we got the last result of the execution workflow and not the last result of the
in some case, design.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, exactly. That's how it currently is. Yeah, but to be fair, maybe that is would be a good use case as well, where you say maybe there's a case to be made where you say where you
Yes.
have some API where you say use last result or get last result or get previous result or something like that. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That might be worth considering as well. And I think it might be even more intuitive for users using this designer like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give that some more thought. That's a good comment. I am thinking that in this case it will be fine because when this executes, this will execute next, so it will use the correct last result, and then this executes, and then this executes, which will also use the correct last result. But that seems more to be coincidental than by design, so that would be better. Yeah, yeah.
And in the same time, what about if we use some loops? Is a engine execute all the loop or each loop one and after, or each activities of try to advance in each loop one and after? I don't know. So I think we have to catch something, or to check if every scenario works well.
Yeah, I agree. That's also good. And this looping behavior, it depends on the implementation. In a for each activity, the body will be executed once for each iteration. But if you have a parallel for each, then all the items in the list will be scheduled at the same time and then executed in parallel, if you will. And then so then you have different behavior. But I think if we implement a mechanism where you get the last result of the activity that executed before this activity, and same for this one, instead of using last result of the activity that last executed, then it would already be more predictable.
Yeah.
All right. So just maybe quick look at the Dapper persistence. I have an example project that shows how to use the Dapper provider. I think it's maybe here. So here there's in the ASP.NET folder, there's Dapper persistence. And because there's different modules in Elsa, so there's a workflow management module, a runtime module, an identity. They each can have their own persistence providers installed. So if you want to use Dapper for all three, then you need to configure those, all three of them, which also means you can use Dapper for one and EF Core for another and MongoDB for yet another module if you wanted to, or your custom provider. Here I'm showing how to do it for each module, use Dapper. And here we have a folder called persistence. So we have Dapper and migrations for Dapper. So that just helps you set up the database automatically instead of having to execute some SQL scripts. It is very similar to EF Core, but not the same. And here we have a modules folder, and yeah, so they have implementations for each of these modules. Yeah, so that's actually all I have to say about the Dapper.
Is the schema selection or customization is easier with Dapper?
I think so. Yeah, if you look at the migrations thing itself. So this, by the way, the migrations are not part of the Dapper library, but of Fluent Migrator, which is unrelated to Dapper, but it just executes. It has a Fluent API to create schemas, and it has, I think, in schema. Yeah, so using in schema, I haven't tried it, but it looks like this would allow you to provide some schema. I don't know if it supports dependency injection, by the way. If it did, then that would be even easier, because then you can just have some options object that you configure using app settings, and then that schema name would be used here. And of course, you would also have to use the schema name, I think maybe just part of your connection string, or should it be part of the SQL that is being built? Probably part of the SQL queries that are being built, which looks like this. So if we look at the Dapper workflow definition store for a second, then here it uses a reusable store, which uses a table name, primary key name. So somewhere it's going to generate a query. So here I created a query builder instead of string concatenating SQL strings in every provider. I created some helper methods. So here we have a parameterized query object, which is a very simple POCO. It's just it's a very thin wrapper around the string builder basically, and the parameters to input when executing the query. Let's take a look where this is used. So here there's an extension method to build a select star from, for example, from some table. So here, either from the parameterized query, which could contain the schema name so that it internally can be used here, that might be a good option. So being able to configure the schema in the migrations, and then in this little API to build SQL strings, I think it's much easier than what you would have to do in EF Core. In EF Core also you need to be mindful of the migrations using a schema, and you need to do some extension to the options of EF Core to carry along the schema name. I think we do have it. There was this contribution from someone who worked on that.
Yeah.
Let's have a quick look. You know what I'm referring to?
I think I know that some people ask about this, included me a long time ago, but don't know if it was released or not.
Looks like it is.
Yeah.
So here there's LCDB context options, and there's, let's see. Yeah, it's being used in these extensions. Use Elsa MySQL, then it's being passed in here. I haven't tested it, but it does require you to create your own migrations, I think, so that you can specify the same schema name, because the default migrations don't include it. Because once these migrations are generated, you see it becomes a hard-coded string. And as far as I know, it's not. Maybe it's possible to parameterize this as part of the migrations, but when I looked into it a couple of years ago, it seemed to me that the recommendation was that it shouldn't be dynamic like that. So I left it alone. Yeah.
And using Dapper, we have we can have the same provider as EF Core, like MySQL, Postgre, SQLite.
Exactly.
Is this already a bundle with some library, or do we have to implement something?
So Dapper is more of, it's a set of extensions around ADO.NET interfaces and contracts. So I think we don't need any wrappers like here. And for EF Core, we only need SQLite, SQL Server, etc., just to have the DB context factories. That's the only reason really, and it's also a good host for the migrations for this particular provider. For Dapper, we have to do it like this. So, for example, where is it here? Here I need to make a distinction between SQLite and the rest because of, I think. Let me see if I remember. Yeah, here you see I'm using as daytime 2, which is with the reason for that being is that SQLite doesn't support daytime offset. So you still need to make this distinction. But at the very least, it's in the same project. We don't need a DB context factory like we need for EF Core.
So and because it relies on ADO.NET, we can have a large number of providers, including, for example, IBM DB2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you want, it's there for you. Yeah, yeah. So that's the nice thing about Dapper, and of course, you can always implement your own persistence provider as well, which directly targets whatever you want. Because the let's take a look at the work for definition store. It just implements I work for definition store, and it's a very, I think at least it's a straightforward interface. It's a bit of work because, well, specifically here because it also requires you to implement find summaries, which is like a view of the work for definition without the big data blob, right? Which is better for listing sets of workflows. But yeah, it's not complicated. And we have implementations for Dapper, EF Core memory, and for workflow instance, we have Elasticsearch, as you know.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and soon we'll also have MongoDB. That there's an open PR by Gurkhan, which is under review, and that will be merged soon as well.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, so lots of options there. And last but certainly not least, the Elsa Studio updates. So what changed is we already had this loaded from the database. So this is the workflow we just worked on. And as you can see, we have the write lines, etc. Read lines for each. Yeah, so that's actually one of the changes. So it now actually loads in the workflow definition into the designer. Last time I showed this, it was just showing some pre-configured hard-coded JSON data that it was loading. So this is now getting from database. Same goes for the activities here. This all comes from from the backend, which is cool, and you can drag and drop them onto the designer. So so that's been implemented as well. And currently I'm working on persistence, so that whenever you make a change here, it gets sent to the backend asynchronously in the background. Yeah, what I really like about working with MudBlazer, you know, an existing component library, it saves a lot of time compared to the designer here, where everything is, all the components are basically created from scratch, which can take a lot of time. Like, you know, these panels, you have to do it yourself, these things here, the tabs even though, you know, the UI wise, it's easy because of Tailwind, the behavior, that's still a significant amount of work, including things like notifications. All of those things you get for free with MudBlazer, so that really speeds up the development. Which I like. And soon there will also be UI validation. So let's say this one is required. I will be able to show some you know, some red border automatically because of we're getting that by from MudBlazer.
Yeah, I have started to change all my UI of my current app into Blazor, and I use also MudBlazer because I have seen you use it in SA3. So I'm currently on the ramp up on all the development for this component library, and I agree that this is very cool and very easy to use.
Nice. Yeah.
And about this, I have one question. Could we work on the NuGet package availability, even if it's not finished or anything else? Because I think it could be really useful to see now how we can just pick some components of the designer to try to include these different components in other applications to see if we have the good coupling system or mechanism to be able to use the designer outside its environment.
And which portions are you considering reusing? Is it like this dashboard, this menu, or just this canvas here, or me, including the picker?
Yeah, for me, it's the activity picker, the tab with the designer workflow, and the drawer on the right. Yes, on the right. Yes, this one. And after, maybe I will need some module like security, secret, etc. But I will pick the different module and implement or just use it in other parts of my application.
I see. Yeah. So I'll be upfront. Right now, you would not be able to do it because everything is intertwined. So some of these components, they rely on services that are provided by, well, that's not true. It's not like a UI component produces services, but I will keep it in mind to make sure that things are decoupled, with keeping in mind that you and other users might want to reuse bits or bits and pieces like this component, including this one, where you can assemble it together. Um, or, or do you think pretty much everyone will have need for the designer, the activity picker, and the properties on the right, so that it could be packaged as a single component? Or do you think even those components should be like Lego blocks that you can pick and choose?
Yes, I think it will be better if we can use it as a Lego block. And
Okay.
I need to advance more on my solution, but when I will be good, I think I will try to um, to make some reference to this project to see how I can embed some component. And I have choose Blazor to be able to embed this easily. And I think we will also just work or think how to export this as web component for other maybe library like Angular, React, everything else.
That would be so cool. Yeah, and it's possible with the custom element support. Did I mention that these activities, they are Blazor components but wrapped in custom elements?
Ah, no. Okay.
Which means that when you integrate this set of Blazor libraries into your own ASP.NET Core Blazor application, you can customize the UI easily using Blazor component library with your own UI if you want to.
Okay.
So yeah. But yeah, thank you for that feedback. I will, because that helps me understand use cases, and then I will keep in mind, to make sure that things are decoupled. So there will be a shared set of services so that it's convenient to get information into these components. But the components themselves, you will want to use them as Lego blocks and put them in your own Blazor application. And as you say, in the future, Angular and React and whatnot.
Yes, one element I think that just at the moment is, for example, the publish button. Yes, in Elsa 2, in the implementation in my current environment, I would love to add some button in the publish menu, because in Elsa 2, when you click, you have publish and publish, or save, or publish revert, and I think there is another. And because I need to communicate with other service when I publish, it would be very great to be able to add some action on this publish menu, or to manipulate. I don't know how to explain. Maybe launch other process before publish, so hook the publish action, etc., etc.
That makes a lot of sense, and definitely that should be made extensible, or open up for adding more submenus, or maybe even replacing the entire publish button with your own if you really wanted to do some customization. And if you're building your own dashboard, maybe you want to use a button like here just to save, or maybe publish. Maybe you don't even want this. So that's gonna offer a lot of options. One question I have is that this is using Mod Blazor, which implements the material design system. What is your opinion on theming? So basically using or customizing the CSS. Is it okay to be able to use MudBlazor's theming system, and of course its CSS classes that it provides, or because it's very opinionated, right? Not every dashboard will want to use material design. Maybe they want to completely retheme the these components.
I'm not very good on CSS and design, but what I'm thinking is, because it's material design, it's something recognized, and there is some standard around the material design. So if we write correctly a site using material design, anyone who wants to customize the theme can keep the material design concept. So I think it's good. And if they want to really customize other animation or other things like and not a color or a display or something like that, okay, it's a very specific CSS. But if we just keep in mind that it's material design and just changing color of primary, secondary, etc., this will they kept the material description and convention. So for me, it's good.
It makes a lot of sense, and I'm also thinking it would be quite a big undertaking to create a custom design system. That's a very big project in its own right, and probably if people wanted to use a different design system or create their own, probably it would make more sense for them to create their own UIs and just consume the backend APIs of Elsa in that case. Did I show you the environment drop-down last time?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, that's
but that's good. It's another example of component that for me I need to override, because I have an environment system, and when I use it, I switch the tokens, everything on the identity of the user, and so I refresh some element, and I will then use other API maybe, because the backend is different.
Then you'll like the following, because the this picker, for example, it comes from a separate module. So if I show you the structure for a second, so here we have modules, and then there's a module called environments, and this is the module that provides this component called environment picker, which means because this is a module, it's optional. So you can just simply not reference this from your application, but it does serve as an example how you can install your own component, which works like, think like this. Yeah, so in there's a module class. So this is what you would implement, and then you inject the app bar service, which is an Elsa Studio service, which is used somewhere by the UI. And then you just add your app bar item, which can be any component you want. So in this case, it's the environment picker, and you can replace or use your own component. And that's basically the idea, what I want to replicate for many of these UI things, so that you can, if you wanted to reuse this dashboard or this studio, but replace certain aspects on certain screens, for example, on the security, maybe you want to use your own user components, for example, then this will be one way to do it. Although in this example, you would probably write your own users module and then simply not use the existing one. But yeah, you get the point. All right, that's it for Elsa Studio updates. And we're right on time, so it's good as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Unless you have any thoughts or questions, then I say I'll see you. I wish you good night, and I'll see you next week.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Good seeing you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.